Greetings to all of you. Warm Advent blessings to all of you, my dear sisters and brothers, and my dear friends. This is your Pastor Yeti. The last day of the week 3 in our third week of Advent, Saturday. Today I'm going to talk about Jesus mocked and crucified. Matthew 27 verses 27 to 38. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the barracks and gathered the whole regiment together. They took off his clothes and dressed him up in a scarlet military cloak. They wove a crown out of thorns and stuck it on his head, and put a reed in his hand. Then they knelt down in front of him. "Greetings, King of the Jews," they said, making fun of him. They spat on him. Then they took the reed and beat him about the head. When they had finished mocking him, they took off his cloak, dressed him in his own clothes again, and led him off to crucify him. As they were going out, they found a man from Cyrene called Simon. They forced him to carry his cross. When they came to the place called Golgotha, which means skull place, they gave him a drink of wine mixed with bitter herbs. When he tasted it, he refused to drink it. So then they crucified him. They divided up his clothes by casting lots, and they sat down and kept watch over him. And they placed the written charge above his head: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then they crucified 2 brigands alongside him, one on his right and one on his left. Almost the whole world is now a tourist trap. Countries compete with each other to attract visitors, particularly from the richer parts of the world, and to give them a memorable vacation while drawing money into the local economy. The novelist Julian Barnes exploits this nicely in his novel England. He imagined this Isles of Wight, a small island just off the southern coast of England, being turned into a miniature version of the whole country, with all the familiar landmarks rebuilt there, and all the familiar events stacked there. The busy tourist wouldn't have to bother going even to London, let alone to other well-known sites around the country. Everything would be there. In the middle of it, Barnes imagined that a role would be found for the monarchy, which is, after all, what many tourists travel to England to see. There would be a king and queen paid to live in a replica of one of the royal places. They would come out on to a balcony at regular times and wave to the crowds. Royal events would be staged so that the tourists would feel they had seen something like the real thing. But of course, it would all be a scam or a sham. Everybody would know that it was just a huge theme park. The motive for doing it all, of course, would be money. The motive for the fake royal events in this section of Matthew is more complex. The soldiers mocking Jesus had nothing to gain financially by dressing him up as a king and pretending to salute him and kneel down before him. They had other things in mind. They had been fighting what today we would call tourists, Jewish rebels against Rome, desperate for liberty, ready to do anything. The Roman soldiers had probably seen some of their friends killed. They were tired of policing such a place, far away from their homes, having to keep the lid on a violated and dangerous situation, with all kinds of rebel groups ready to riot. Now here was someone who had been accused of trying to make himself king of the Jews. He was going to die within hours. Why not have a bit of fun at his expense? Why not tease him, beat him up a bit, show him what the Romans think of other people's kings? Like the king in Julian Barnes' Scaled Down England, let's let him know that someone else is in fact boss. It's hard reading this story to remember that this is the same Jesus who, days before, was confronting the authorities in the temple, and who weeks before was healing people, celebrating with people and teaching them about God's kingdom. But Matthew has woven hints of all that into the story to remind us of how Jesus' crucifixion was not a messy accident at the end of a glittering career, but was in fact the proper, though shocking, climax to it. It isn't just that Jesus is enthroned, as it were, on the cross, with the title Matthew wants us to see as the true one written above his head. That, to be sure, is striking in itself. Condemned prisoners regularly had a placard above them, indicating their crime. What for Pilate and the soldiers was Jesus' crime, his claim to be Israel's true king, was for Matthew the sober truth. And the crucifixion was the means by which his kingdom would be established. As he had said to James and John, there would come a time when he would indeed be enthroned, with one person on his right and another on his left. But the throne he had in mind was a cross. Why? Because the kingdom Jesus had spoken of, from the Sermon on the Mount onwards, was never a kingdom to be established and maintained by military force. If it was to be God's kingdom, it would come about by God's means. And the means that the true God chooses to us are the means of self-giving love. Notice how in this passage parts of the Sermon on the Mount come back into play. Jesus himself, at last, is struck about the face by the soldiers and doesn't retaliate. They take off his outer and inner garments, leaving him naked. As he is going out to be crucified, the soldiers use their right under Roman law to compel someone to carry a burden for him, just as in Matthew 5:41. Only this time the burden in question is the heavy cross beam on which Jesus will be hung. The point of it all is this: Jesus is leading the way he had spoken of from the beginning, the way of being God's true Israel, the light of the world. He himself is set on a hill, unable now to remain hidden. This is how he is shining the light of God's love into the dark corners of the world, by taking the evil of the world, the hatred and cruelty and unthinking mockery of the world, the gratuitous violence, bullying, and torture that still defaces the world, and letting it do its worst to him. Never let it be said that the Christian faith is an airy-fairy thing, all about having wonderful inner spiritual experiences and not about the real world. This story takes us to the very heart of what Christianity is all about. And there we meet, close up and raw, the anger and bitterness of the world, doing its worst against one who embodies and represents the love of the Creator God himself. And now, how do we respond as we stand and wait this shocking, tragic, and yet deeply healing event? We are, of course, outraged that such things should happen. Yes, Jesus will say to us, and they all are still happening around the world today. What are we doing about it? We are also horrified that such things should happen to Jesus himself, this Jesus who had done so many wonderful things, through whom healing and restoration, forgiveness, and love came so freely to so many. Yes, Jesus will say to us, and this enthronement now will bring healing, forgiveness, and hope to millions more. Do we know it ourselves? And if so, are we helping others to know it too? Let me give you some reflection questions. How do you respond to the cross? How does it touch you with your life? Jesus the one, our Christ, brings healing, forgiveness, and hope to millions more. Let you and me become that beautiful instrument in God's hands to reach out to our neighbors, to our friends, to give them this hope, this healing, and forgiveness. This is your Pastor Yeti.